So the better way to say it is that really no one who perpetuated that fraud in 2008 ever went to jail.
Okay.
Because and I'll explain the background of Raj Rajaratnam, who you're talking about, but he had nothing to do with that, and that's not what he was charged with.
Interesting.
Raj is actually a guy that you need to sit with.
Okay.
Because there's some language there that, I worked on Wall Street. You and I both know that, but you're a lot longer in the tooth as far as knowledge of this stuff than I ever got a chance to be. And Raj was, to put it mildly, he's probably one of the 10 best investors to ever live. And he was charged in the end of 2009 with insider trading. He ran a hedge fund in New York. And for all the guys who were on Wall Street during that period, I'm sure they say a lot of the same things that the guys I know say to me. And that is that, especially whether it be in hedge funds or in on the trading floors and stuff like that, there's always some things that come through. You're doing your job every day. Things slip on the phone, whatever. That's not what they accused this guy of. They accused Raj Rajaratnam of being in charge of this mass conspiracy on Wall Street. The show Billions? Mm-hmm. It's basically what they were saying he was doing. Where you're meeting people in a back alley or a pizza place and being like, give me the fucking numbers on this company. That's not at all what he did. And the funny thing is, I had followed that case. I was like a freshman in high school or something, or maybe not even in high school yet, but I was interested in that case because it was such a big deal at the time. And he got found guilty. He got the longest sentence, I believe, still to this day ever for insider trading. And I thought he was guilty because, I read the news. I read the Wall Street Journal, all this stuff.
How long was the sentence?
This sentence was for 11 years. He ended up doing 7.5. Kim Kardashian got him out of prison for the last half a year he was going to do pre-parole. He got to do it home because of Kim Kardashian. So
really?
Shout out to Kim. But I got connected to him through a fan of my show who reached out and said, do you know who Raj is? I said, fuck yeah, I know who Raj is. He's like, what do you think of that? I'm like, I thought he was guilty, but I thought, I think insider trading is not a good thing. I just thought it was kind of crazy, how much they played this up. And he goes, okay, that's fair or whatever. But I think you'd be really good to do a podcast with him. And then we started talking about, I said, well, what's your opinion? And he went through the whole thing, and he's like, I'm a friend, so I'm obviously I'm a little biased, but no, I think he was innocent as all hell. And this really got my brain turning because I'm like, we should. This was a big case. Are we sure this guy was innocent? But what had happened was, and part of what you had brought this up for was, the Southern District of New York didn't want to go after the cases for the 2008 crisis, the actual fraud on the mortgages and everything, because they were complex and they were not guaranteed wins. So they said, we need something to make it a guaranteed win. And they hired a PR department. They had I forget the exact number, so I won't say it, but they had more than several people whose sole job was media relations working for the Southern District of New York. And they went after hedge funds to sell the hedge funds as cracking down on Wall Street. Now, is there some bad shit that happens to hedge funds? Absolutely. Should they go after that? Absolutely. But they sold it as, we're getting all the crooks who did it in '08. And that's not what they were doing. So when I was talking with Raj's friend, I said, I want to talk to him first as well, like meet him on Zoom or something quickly. But, let's wait a few weeks on this. I want to do a deep dive on this whole thing. And so I started going through everything. And I read his book that he wrote by hand in prison as well, which of course is biased towards him. You have to take that into account. But then I started looking at some of the court documents. My dad, who's a civil litigator, not a criminal attorney, but I had him look at a couple things too. And it started to kind of click to me with some of the stuff they did in the Southern District of New York during that era. And I'm like, holy shit, I don't think this guy did this. Do I think that there was probably something somewhere where there were some trades where there were information? Sure. But there was one thing I was damn sure of was, I'm like, I don't think there was any criminal intent here. But I want to know that when I sit down with him. Mm-hmm. So we sat down and did a podcast. He came down for the day. He was there the whole day. Awesome dude. One of the most humble people I've ever met. You've sat with a lot of people who have a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. You've sat with some serious billionaires and stuff. through my last job, I did sit with a lot of people who have a lot of money, and plenty of them were good people. But, my experience is that there's kind of a thing when you're sitting across from someone who maybe is worth $1 billion or 600 million, something like that, where when you look them in the eyes, it's like, you're you and I'm me. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a little thing there. And there was none of that with him. He was as cool as a cucumber. And what really did it for me was, one of the many things wrong with his case was the government had to rely on witnesses, which to an extent, like, I understand this is a part of the process. You have to do that. But it's a tough thing when you have to turn people who are corrupt. And the main witness, who is, for all intents and purposes, responsible for him being behind bars, that witness, in addition to actually being like a really bad dude for reasons that didn't have to do with insider trading or anything like that, that guy was called to testify 2.5 years later in Raj's brother's trial. So the last day of the statute of limitations, Raj's brother, who was not like the number 2 or anything, he was like a VP or something. Raj's brother is in Brazil, and the Southern District decides, we're going to charge him because he won't come back to America now, because they're originally from Sri Lanka. He's like, he'll flee. We'll get a W. This will be great. Dude goes, fuck that. Gets on the first flight back to New York. Wow. So the brother lands in New York. Now, mind you, Raj has now been in prison for almost 2 years at this point, guilty of the 14 counts. They charged the brother with, I want to say it was 8 counts, but maybe we can check that. It was, it was a number of counts. And they were all the same trades that Raj was charged with. This time, that witness, though, comes into court and he testifies the opposite. Because his probation was over. The government had already paraded him out there as like I think his name was Anil Kumar. Anil Kumar was one of the best witnesses we've ever dealt with, whatever. And this was a much smaller case because the brother was smaller potatoes. And so the prosecution was like stunned when he testifies the opposite. Like, oh no, they didn't know about this, they didn't know about that. And they didn't charge the guy with perjury, nothing. They quietly let it go. His brother was found not guilty in 3 hours, which means the jury didn't even order pizza, right? I mean, this is a financials case. You usually spend like 2 days as a jury just looking at the trades before you even start talking about the case. And so I saw all this online when we're researching this, and my dad was like, what the fuck? Looking at it. Raj then files an appeal, obviously, like, hey, your witness just testified the opposite in court. They found me guilty. I think I need a new case here. Tossed out. And I just watched this system. Then I find the same year, his driver, who had been the driver for the family for a few years, who would drive his wife to prison to visit him. There's a big story in the New York Post that says the driver is given the details on like Raj living as king in prison and all this, and how he smuggles in stuff for Raj to get favors. They don't report the fact that and because he filed a lawsuit, they don't report that fact as coming 3 weeks after the driver beat the shit out of his wife, almost to death. And of course got fired by Raj's wife. So now suddenly, he claims all this stuff. And I watched how they painted this guy. And then I met him. And now I know him. Now he's a friend too. And of course, I may be a little biased on the situation, but I wasn't when I started. I mean, when I talked to him on Zoom before he came down and did the podcast, he asked me point blank. He said, well, I heard you had followed the case. What did you think? And I said, I thought you were guilty. Like, I was very upfront about it. And he was like, no problem. Whatever. But afterwards, I was like, there's probably a few things that literally every hedge fund was technically guilty of. Front-running trades, abso-fucking-lutely. Stuff like that. That happened. But when it comes to like what he was accused of and all that, I was like, wow.
Did he ever admit to doing any of it?
Not only did he not admit it, the show Billions, to bring that up again, to be very specific, that is, as it's been alleged, and I think maybe Andrew Ross Sorkin has confirmed this, but I'm not positive. That's based on the Southern District's chasing of Steve Cohen. Mm-hmm. Steve Cohen is probably the best investor ever on Wall Street. And, Raj was one of the best. He obviously ran in circles with Steve. The Southern District never wanted Raj. They wanted Steve. And if Steve did anything wrong, Raj didn't know about it. That's what he says, at least. And so when he was taken down for questioning, when he was first arrested, they spent like it was in 7 figures they spent to arrest him. Like they had duck boats in the river, on the East River in New York. This guy's like, a 50-year-old Wall Street guy. He's not exactly running 12 miles away from cops, right?
Or swimming across the river.
Yeah. I don't think Raj is like a great swimmer. That's just, I don't know, just how I look at it. But
doesn't have a secret submarine ready?
No. So, they have the cameras out there, everything. And they take him downtown. The guy answered questions with them without a lawyer. He was so perplexed by this. Like, he legitimately was like, what? What do you mean? He didn't know what he was arrested for until they took him down, which is perfectly legal. They don't have to Mirandize you until you get down there and all that. But he answered questions without a lawyer. And he was like, they said, listen, we got you on these wiretaps and everything, because he was the first wiretap case in Wall Street history. And they're like, if you talk to us now, like, this isn't good for you, but you won't go to prison. You do the right thing. You answer on some other guys. You can go home to your wife. You're worth billions of dollars. Like, you're still going to be worth billions of dollars. Like, call it a day. We got you. And he said, no, I'm innocent. I don't know anything about other people. I run one company. He didn't even know a defense attorney. Never met one. Didn't know anyone who was a criminal. Didn't know anyone who might be a criminal. Like, he had he was definitely like a little naive with this whole thing, which I'm not even blaming him, but call it what it is. He definitely was. And he's an immigrant from Sri Lanka. He had always believed in everything about America. And so he thought, the justice system, this is how it's supposed to work. I've been accused of something. I think this is totally wrong, but you go into court, you argue the point, and they're going to see it. Because, guilty people get found guilty, innocent people don't, right?
Especially rich ones.
Right. And that's not really, especially at that time, you had like what was it? The
mob.
Not
the
just the
pitchforks.
mob. What was why am I blanking on this right now? There was Occupy Wall Street. They were like outside his trial in 2011. So wasn't exactly a great time for him. And obviously the media was completely against him. But he said, no, I'm not going to inform on anything. So then they keep offering it. And and they're like, you don't understand. We have like a 98% conviction rate. Like, you're fucked. They never wanted him. But he keeps saying no. And so then he gets found guilty on all 14 counts, which right before it went to the jury, his lawyer looked at him and said, we just won 14-0. So, that was quite a shock when suddenly, he's actually convicted. He's facing 25 years in prison. Again, they go to him and they say, well, now you're going to go to prison. But like, you can make this a year or something and work for us. Fuck you, I'll go to prison. And you can ask Jim DiOrio, you can ask these other guys. That doesn't happen. And that doesn't happen in white collar ever either. But to put it full circle with this guy, he did all his time. He wrote that book by hand in prison. And he has, instead of, the guy's, he has not told me his net worth, but I can kind of do math talking with him. The guy's worth $5-6 billion. And I think he was like trading Ethereum from his jail cell in 2016. I mean, the guy's a fucking genius. And he could just go off into the sunset now with his money, his family. He's got his total freedom at this point and call it a day after all the shit that happened to him. But he is making it a life calling to help out people who are abused by the system. He said, when you go into prison, it's not like, oh, everybody's innocent. There's a lot of very guilty people in there. But he said the numbers probably, I think he had an exact number based on his estimations, but it's closer to like 80% are fully guilty. And then 90% are maybe a little guilty or something, but maybe are doing a lot more because they didn't, they got bowled over. And then 10% are not guilty and they just got bowled over. He said, I could have outspent the government 6 ways to Sunday for the rest of my life every single day. That's how much money I had. And they did this to me. What does that say about everybody else? So he fights for it. And probably one of the cooler, heavier moments I had in 2022 didn't for me personally, like didn't come on the podcast. It was up in New York in November. I was up there on some business, and we had a meeting at Raj's office. And it was me, Raj, my friend Ryan Tate, who runs Vet Paul, another guy I think you'd really like. Mark McCrane, who's the original guy who hooked me up with Raj, really good friend at this point. Jim DiOrio was there. And then another guy, Jason Flom, who is one of the co-founding board members of the Innocence Project. And we're sitting in a room, and Jason and Raj are going back and forth because obviously they have a similar passion here. And what would happen is Jason's talking about a lot of cases he works with, guys who were put on death row and they're innocent and DNA can prove it and all that. And then he would ask Raj about his case to kind of relate it back in. And they're just having this back and forth about that for a long time. And maybe like an hour in, Raj is bringing up something from his case to answer a question where you can tell, like, because, you know, every time you do this, you still relive it. And you could see, like, he's frustrated because he has to remember this thing that happened and, like, they did this. And, you know, this was his life. And he, like, stopped himself. He said, you know, I thank God every day that I live in this country. It is the best country on planet Earth. You don't see people going to Russia. You don't see people going to China. They come here. And you know what? This is the best part. He goes, this country has been so good to me and my family. Now, is he worth $5-6 billion? Yes. Is that good? Yeah, I would say it's pretty good. Guy had 10 years of his life taken from him. He had his reputation, which was impeccable, taken from him. He has his name plastered everywhere in a negative light, taken from him. And frankly, and I'll add in my color commentary, taken from him in corruption. And he still says that. And I'm telling you, Jim DiOrio and Ryan Tate, two veterans, you're a veteran. I'm watching them across the room. Ryan's almost got a tear in his eye listening to it. Mm-hmm. And Jim, who, you know, that's not a dude who reacts to a lot of things, but I see him, you know, ex-FBI too, by the way, who's the people who ran this case on Raj. I see him like backing up. And then he actually apologized to Raj on behalf of the FBI too. It was really, that was something. And so when I'm sitting in there, I'm like, wow, this all came from like one fucking podcast that I did, just getting these people in the room. That's kind of cool.